Hello, and welcome to the Resilient Life podcast. Resilient Life is part of peakprosperity.com. It's where we focus on practical and actionable knowledge for building a better future. I'm your host, Adam Taggart. At Peak Prosperity, we talk a lot about the dynamic of living two lives, where many of us trudge through a workday characterized by dissatisfaction and unfulfillment, and only in the privacy of our personal lives, after work is done and the kids are in bed, we attempt to squeeze a few minutes of time in, focusing on the priorities that are personally meaningful for us. Does that sound like you? If so, you're not alone. Study after study shows that well over 70% of workers are actively dissatisfied with their jobs and with the work that life has steered them into. But what if it didn't have to be this way? What if the work you did on a daily basis was aligned with your values, your passions, and your natural strengths? What if you looked forward to each new workday with a sense of excitement and gratitude? How much better would your life be from where it is today? If this sounds compelling to you, then listen on. As many Peak Prosperity readers know, 5 years back I went through my own career transition from a successful yet unhappy role as a Silicon Valley executive to entrepreneur and proud co-founder of Peak Prosperity. My only regret about the transition is not making it sooner. Out of the success of that experience, I wrote the book, Finding Your Way to Your Authentic Career, to serve as a guidebook for others wrestling with the desire to make such a large career move, but anxious about the risks. In that book, I emphasize the importance of beginning the process with self-understanding. All of your plans will be based off of your hopes, goals, and capabilities. The single greatest resource I encountered in developing an accurate self-understanding was the aptitudes testing offered by the Johnson O'Connor Foundation. And today, we're joined by Steve Green, the Director of Public Relations of Johnson O'Connor. In addition, he's also the Director of the New York office, and he's been an employee of the foundation since 1987. I'm excited to share the science behind the Johnson O'Connor testing process with our listeners. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Adam.
Well, Steve, you heard my in my introduction there what a big believer I am in the impact that the testing that Johnson O'Connor offers can have on people's lives. A lot of people I talk to about this don't realize that Johnson O'Connor was actually a real man. And maybe we could start with you giving just a little bit of background on how the Johnson O'Connor testing process came to be.
Sure, absolutely. I think a common misconception is that Johnson and O'Connor are two different people, and those are the last names. He was actually one person. His first name is Johnson, his last name is O'Connor, and he is our founder. He was a Harvard-educated mathematician and philosopher, and after graduating from Harvard, he conducted research in astronomical mathematics with Percival Lowell, who was in his time a very influential and famous astronomer. And he then went on to work in electrical engineering at General Electric. In 1922, at General Electric, he was asked by his supervisor, a man named F.P. Cox, to develop an in-house project which came to be known as the Human Engineering Lab. Its goal was to match employees up to work that suited their natural abilities so that GE could run more efficiently. So this led O'Connor into a study of inborn aptitudes, or natural abilities. So based on empirical research, he developed a number of classifications of specific human abilities, which came to be called things like structural visualization, inductive reasoning, ideaphoria, and so on. In 1939, O'Connor broke away from GE. Based on the success of this testing program, he realized it's much more important and maybe larger than something used just for industrial screening. And he formed the Johnson O'Connor Research Foundation and established it as a not-for-profit scientific and educational research organization. Today we have grown into a national organization with 11 locations spread out throughout major cities. And we measure about 22 different aptitudes that combine like molecules to form chemical reactions. So what we're looking at is the combination of the low, average, and high scores. And we use that to guide people toward appropriate career and educational paths. In addition to aptitudes, we measure English vocabulary, which is knowledge and therefore can be acquired. We believe vocabulary to be one of the best predictors of educational and occupational success. In studies we conducted, we found that those who rose to high levels in a variety of fields tended to possess superior vocabularies. So in addition to measuring people's innate abilities, we also measure their vocabulary levels and educate them about effective ways to build vocabulary as well.
Great. One of the things I really love about the genesis of all this was, and correct me if I'm describing this the wrong way, but GE was, I think, wise enough back in the 1920s to realize, look, back then you would get hired by GE straight out of school, and you'd pretty much work most of your career there, right, or all your career there.
Right.
And their thought process was, if we can figure out what a given worker is uncommonly good at, what he's better at than most other people, and craft a path for him in his career here at the company, we're going to get the best work out of that person. He's going to be playing to his strengths, and he's also probably going to be most fulfilled, so he's going to get the most out of it as well.
That's right. It's also a good way to retain employees for a long period of time.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So
yeah, that was a very visionary concept back then, and it led to the genesis of what later on came to be called the field of positive psychology.
Well, clearly, I think it makes a lot of intuitive sense. And from the science side of things, what I love about it is it's extraordinarily data-driven. And you talked about the empirical background that Johnson O'Connor had, but it's really all about testing and measurement and looking for correlation. And the fact that it's been running, now getting close to a full century.
Yes.
I don't know if you have a sense of how many people have gone through the tests, but I imagine it's got to be at least in the hundreds of thousands.
We believe it's close to 1 million.
Right. So
over 500,000 people have gone through the testing. We believe it's probably, we haven't kept exact numbers, but we believe it's probably close to 1 million.
All right. So this is sort of a statistician's fantasy, right? You've got just a massive sample size.
Yes. I think scientists really salivate over our database when they hear about the number of cases we have.
Right. Which, again, I can understand. But what that means for the individual test taker, it means that the predictability or the predictive nature of the results, you can have an extremely high degree of confidence in because the sample size is so high.
Yes. One of the determining factors in whether a test becomes part of our battery is whether or not it has a high reliability. And reliability means that you're going to get an accurate score throughout your life. It's not going to change much over time. So the thing that's very helpful about knowing about one's aptitudes is that they remain relatively stable over time, so people can refer back to this to help them make decisions in the future.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the future of the podcast, but I've heard that while Johnson O'Connor does invite people who have taken the test to come back at a later stage in life if they want to and take the test, they don't really stress it that much because the results tend to be so consistent over time.
That's exactly right. What we do is we take the opportunity when clients come back for follow-up sessions. People come back again, sometimes 20 years, 30 years later, to review their results. And at that point, we are always updating retest reliability studies on a particular test. So we use that opportunity as a retest reliability study.
Great. All right, so just closing my summary here, the way I think of the Johnson O'Connor test, it's a way for people to get a very empirical, data-driven, quantitative understanding of where they excel in their natural aptitudes versus the general population. And this sort of plays into the whole, play to your strengths type of strategy when it comes to a career.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good synopsis of what we do. Even the ancient Greeks believed in the concept of nothei theoton, which is know thyself.
Know thyself, yeah.
And we offer objective information about one's natural talents that can just help us make wise choices about school, work, even hobbies.
Exactly. The way I describe it, it's one of those garbage in, garbage out equations, meaning you're going to be making, we're talking here about the career side of things, and we can talk in a bit about some of the benefits to other aspects of life. But
Sure.
if you're, basically using data points to base decisions off of, if you've got bad or faulty data points, you get bad or faulty decisions. And what I think
Right.
your testing does is it gives people very accurate, very high confidence data points so that they can be
Yes.
making very accurate, very high confidence decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no such thing as a 100% error-free measurement, but our measurements are, as measurements go, quite reliable and valid. And just from my experience here over the last almost 30 years, have found anecdotally this has helped people really change the direction of their lives or continue forward with enhanced confidence and motivation.
Yeah, and I mentioned in the introduction that it's very common out there for people to be frustrated about where they are in life, career-wise, and I mean
Right.
a huge part of that is it's a fault I think of our education system, but we don't spend any time with people through the formal education process, um, helping them zero in on these attributes and then mapping them to their interests and their passions and things like that. We just
Right.
cram a bunch of learning in their head and hope that the light bulb is going to go off at some point. They're going to have an epiphany, and that happens with a rare minority of people.
Yes.
And so what happens is people get stuck in a job, whatever. And usually they wake up in their 30s or 40s after they've been in it for a decade or two and think, gosh, I really wish I weren't here. It wouldn't have been what I picked for myself now that I know myself a little bit better. But boy, I don't know what I would do next. Or I don't have the confidence that if I try something that I think might be better suited for me, that it's going to work out. And while there are no guarantees in life, what I love about the Johnson O'Connor test is it really helps cut through that uncertainty. Those big existential questions about like, what's my purpose? What should I do with my life? It really helps you understand. It doesn't necessarily give you the exact answer that you should do exactly this, but it says that the work you do or the things that you engage in need to have these elements in them for you to either be fulfilled or frankly be good at them. And I
Yes.
think I think it's that ability to kind of cut through a lot of the uncertainty that I find so powerful. It gives answers that help people really focus their priorities and begin to be able to make decisions. It certainly did for me. So it sounds like you agree with that general outlook on it, but at a higher level, I mean, what are the benefits that the test offers? When people are coming into your office, what are they looking for, and what do you see as the right type of person to be looking to engage with the Johnson O'Connor test?
Well, that's a good question. As I mentioned before, just the concept of note siotan means that most people will benefit from an enhanced knowledge of themselves. And we offer people objective information about their talents that can help them as early as age 14. That's the youngest that we test people. We feel that's a kind of a safe age where aptitudes have gelled and we can measure them with confidence. So about half of our clients are between the ages of 14 and 21. They are primarily students who are trying to figure out, what college to go to, what to major in, what types of courses, and eventually what career path to head into. The other half of our clients are everyone older than that. Many of them are, recent graduates. There's something called the quarter-life crisis, where people in their mid-20s realize that the career that they initially thought was going to be it for them is not it, and they're in a panic mode and they come in for testing just to kind of get back on track. And then we have older working adults who are either trying to fine-tune their career paths or are very unhappy and want to do something completely different. And we even get people who are, well on in their careers, thinking about second careers or even retirement, how to plan out their retirement years. And some people just come in not necessarily to change their careers, but just to pursue satisfying avocations.
Yeah, and one of the things that I realized about the insights is even if you don't change your career or the things you're engaged in radically, that better self-understanding is still extremely applicable to your current career, your current position.
Yes.
Really sort of a catalyst, I guess. So it can be a catalyst for excelling in the current vector you're on, or it can be the catalyst for change.
Yes. Yes, very well said. Now, some of the clients we have are not in a position where they're able to throw away the career path they've been on. And, they may have a mortgage and kids in college and, financially they're wearing golden handcuffs, but it can also help them find ways to make what they're doing better, better fit. Maybe they realize, hey, they're really good at coming up with a rapid flow of ideas, so they're going to start an in-house newsletter or train people in their division. Or maybe they'll find satisfying avocations to use those. And then, of course, we have people who do make huge career changes even later on in their careers. I had one business executive who went back to medical school in his late 30s and then went on to run a satisfying medical practice and then for about 10 years and then changed again back to a medical corporation, becoming the CEO. So there are lots of stories that people have made huge changes, and then there are lots of stories that people came in and said, this sounds like me. This is what I'm not surprised at all, but it gives them renewed confidence and even empowers them to continue on.
Yeah, I think we might get into this a little bit further on in the podcast, but one of the things that it did for me that I think is worth emphasizing here is I went in definitely with the hopes of getting better self-understanding, which I definitely got. And at the time I'd cut the cord and had sort of jumped deliberately without the safety net. So I knew I had to find something to move towards, and I really wanted it to be something that was much more authentic for me than what I'd been doing.
Right.
And I had a number of different options that I was looking at the time. And what I found extremely helpful with the results, not only did it point me towards a specific direction and I was able to focus on the opportunities that were a good fit with the results that I was getting from the test, but it made it so much easier to say no to the other options that were on the table that were, quote unquote, good options that, I culturally, whatever, I felt fortunate to have them. And up until taking the test, had a lot of internal angst that, oh my gosh, everybody says this is such a good job. It's a good company. Am I throwing my future away by not taking the opportunity? But when I was able to see what type of work I should be doing and then overlay that against the opportunities, there were a lot of kind of quote good opportunities that I was looking at that was taking up a big chunk of my mental capacity that I could all of a sudden put to the side and feel good about, saying, you know what, it's a good job, it's a good opportunity, just not for someone who's composed like me, and I can feel good saying goodbye to that.
Right. That's a really very important point, because there's so many pressures that shape our choices. Societal pressures, parental pressures, peer pressures, what we think is prestigious, and sometimes what's left out of the puzzle is, well, what are we innately good at doing? What will make us happy and engage us and fulfill us in our work? And there are some people who have a work ethic where that's not important. They say, oh, you just have to work hard, earn money, pay your bills, that kind of thing. And of course, those are not people who are in touch with our philosophy.
Right. Well, and I think it really is the rare person who, without outside data like this, who really fully understands themselves well. I mean, obviously we all have a decent self-understanding of ourselves to a certain degree, but there's also a lot that we're blind to or that we're anxious about. And what I love about this is it's all, it's very empirical. There's no emotion behind it. It's just what the data says. And it's interesting, there's strengths that come from the results, whether the results are positive or negative, meaning, when it validates opinions that you have about yourself, it's great, because then okay, I can really lean hard on those parts of myself, right? If it says I'm a good problem solver, great. I can feel confident jumping into an uncertain environment to solve problems. But at times too, it tells you that, boy, some of these things that you thought you were good at or maybe hoped you were good at, you are just not naturally strong at versus, the average person. It doesn't mean don't do it. It just means, maybe don't quit your day job, if you want to indulge in that part of yourself.
That's exactly right. And I think that's a very important point, because, what we don't do is tell people what they can or cannot do. Because even if a person lacks an aptitude, if they're really motivated and hardworking, they may be able to succeed to some extent. But chances are they will not enjoy that work or find it fulfilling. We don't necessarily even tell people what they should or should not do. Basically, what we'll tell people is these are the things you're most likely to enjoy doing because they came naturally to you. And when people gravitate toward their strengths, they tend, again, to be very fulfilled and engaged by their work. There's a positive psychologist who calls that the flow state. When you're engaging your natural talents and being properly challenged, it's a very positive state of mind.
Well, let's use this then to segue into a description of what taking the test actually looks like, because I think most people, when they're thinking of a test here, they're thinking of probably something like the Myers-Briggs, where they're sat down, you sit down for an hour and circle a lot of bubbles on a chart. Your test is much more kind of like a mental steeplechase. It's just a whole bunch of different things. A lot of them, half the time I didn't really even know what you guys were testing at the time. And it's long. I think it's 6 hours of testing, right? Followed by...
Yeah, well, the tests themselves are more like puzzles or games. They were designed initially, we worked in conjunction with the psychology departments at the Illinois Institute of Technology, MIT, and Stevens Institute of Technology to develop what we call work samples. And they're more like hands-on samples of work or puzzles or games that people perform that measure natural abilities. We're not asking people what they like to do or think they're good at. We're really getting at, how are you hardwired? What are you naturally good at? So we're having people put together three-dimensional jigsaw puzzles or move pins with tweezers or listen to musical tones. And we try to keep paper and pencil activities to a minimum in this type of testing. And again, we're really, you think more like a puzzle or a game than an actual school test. The length of the tests, there's 3 sessions. The first 2 are half days of testing, about 3.5 hours each. And those are split up into 2 approximately 90-minute sessions, one of which is individually administered tests, the other of which is audiovisually administered tests. And there are 2 sessions like that, and the third session is the explanation of the results that we call the summary session. And that lasts about an hour to an hour and a half. And we send people home with a bar graph with all of their scores and percentiles and written explanatory material and a book called Understanding Your Aptitudes, which has chapters about each of the traits, a variety of handouts that focus on initial steps to take after the testing, and some that focus on particular aptitudes. In addition to that, we encourage our clients to record these sessions because going back and listening to it can be very valuable. So it is time-consuming. It's a total of 7 hours of testing and then an hour to an hour and a half feedback. And those sessions can be done consecutively in a day and a half or spread out over 3 days. And those days can be on different weeks or different months, whatever works best.
Great, but not on the same day, right?
No, I mean, some brave souls decide they're going to do a full day of testing and then come back the next morning to hear the results. And it doesn't seem to have that much of an impact on their results, but it does seem to have an impact on their mood at the end of the day because it's a long day.
No, I can believe it. That's a long day. I think your brain's pretty fried near the end.
Yeah, well, people have an hour for lunch. They can go out and get some coffee and some refuel and come back and do it again. I guess the ones who do that are probably the pretty high-energy people to begin with. But again, we don't it's not as fun to do it that way. It's more relaxed to spread them out.
Yeah, and as someone who's taken it, I definitely advise at least breaking it into 2 days of testing.
Yeah, and sometimes we've even had people break the sessions in 2, like coming for an hour and a half one day, an hour and a half another day. It's just coming in more often.
Yeah. And then as you said, so it's the 7 hours of the actual tests, and then it's an hour to an hour and a half where you sit down with somebody on staff, a researcher who basically comes in and says, look, here's what the computer spit out. Let's talk through those results, but then let's talk about you and your interests and your understanding of yourself and see, how this really meshes with your own experience with your life. So
That's correct. I mean, basically, we could just give a person a list of examples of occupations based on how they scored, but the discussion tends to get much more in depth than that. We do like to know what people's interests and values and hobbies and things like that are that might, shed some light on how they might best use these abilities.
Right.
Because there's no set way that one person has to use their abilities. There's a variety of different ways they can use them.
Right, right. And for me, it spit out, hey, these are some careers that you should look at because they score highly for people with your profile.
Right.
And interestingly, a couple of them just surprised me like crazy. I had never thought I might be interested in them. And of course, upon further reflection, I can now actually see why those might be good fits.
Right.
But for me, what was really important is, I tell people that go to take the test, don't expect the clouds to part and, a hand to come down from the heavens and say, you should be a dentist, right?
Yeah.
Even though the computer will spit out a number of jobs to take a look at.
Right.
But I did have my own epiphany moment. I think a lot of people do. And it wasn't around a specific profession like that. It was more, the work you do has to fulfill these parts of you for it to be work for you to care about. And that was super helpful to me.
Right.
In fact, I probably use that insight more than any to make the leap to do what I'm doing now.
That's a great story. Those are the kinds of stories I love to hear personally. And I hear a lot of them over the years because people do find this to be very helpful. And one of the ways to think about aptitudes is when we look at our philosophy is, people come in with testing mentalities. They think it's good to score high and bad to score low. And the urge is to try to score high in everything. Most people score high in between 2 and 6 areas out of the 22 that we measure. What we're interested in is how they combine with the average and the low scores. It's kind of like a chemical reaction. And when the high scores are not being used, they can instead become almost problematic sources of restlessness and dissatisfaction. So we think of aptitudes not just as one's natural abilities, but almost like needs that have to be met.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that because that's what my researcher said in the session that I had after doing the testing. And I found that it's very true. And it was certainly accurate in describing why the work I was doing before I went and took the test was so unfulfilling to me. Because when I looked at the things that the testing service said, were the things that were really important to how I was wired, very few of them were actually getting fed by the work I was doing before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you were a good candidate for our service then.
Yeah. And, like I said, for me, I had a pretty big ask of it, which is I want to do a radical career transition, and I want the testing service to help me make sure I make the best decision possible. And again, I'm happy to say it worked out for me. But as we talked about earlier, I think this test is relevant for just about anybody. I mean, I really can't think of a good reason for somebody not to take the test if they have the ability and the means to do so, because that self-understanding will spill into so many other areas of your life.
Well, that's so true. I mean, and it's funny because parents come in with their kids. They sit in the summary sessions, and they often say, "Gee, I wonder how I would score." And I said, "Well, you don't have to wonder. You can come in and do the tests." I said, "Yeah, but I might find out that I've been doing the wrong thing all these years. That's scary." But I mean, it's like I said, it's good to know.
It's good to know. And even if you don't want to change what you're doing, it just helps you do what you're doing better. Just customize it even more to your personal,
exactly.
tastes and needs.
You might discover, for instance, that you score very low on our measure of clerical speed, and maybe 50% of your work is clerical in nature, and it's time-consuming and tedious. So maybe you find a way to minimize that,
right.
delegate that, and that in and of itself can elevate your job satisfaction.
Right. Well, you mentioned that 50% of the people that take your test are between the ages of 14 and 21. And I think, and I'm a father, and I've got 2 daughters who, once I took this test, I said, my kids are definitely going to take it. My older daughter just turned 14.
Okay.
I am going to give her a little bit more time, at least a couple more months, to let her brain mature a little bit. But, I feel like as a parent, really one of the absolute best gifts I can give them is enough of a self-understanding of what makes them tick and what they may want out of life, so that as they begin to make those really big life decisions that are going to determine the trajectory they go on in life. Do they go to college? If so, where do they go to college? If so, what do they study? And to have those what I sort of define the inputs or the outputs of the testing service as is I tell people it gives you compass points that you can navigate by confidently.
That's a
And
great analogy. I like that.
thanks. Feel free to steal it.
I will.
But I mean, I think back to when I was at that age, and I actually was fairly successful. Graduated near the top of my class, went to an Ivy League school, whatnot.
Hmm.
And I will say I struggled and stumbled through a lot of my early 20s and whatnot because I really did not know what I wanted to do in life. And sometimes even, if you're a high achiever, it can work against you. You can open a lot of doors, but deciding which door to go through and what to do with your energies is really tough.
Yeah.
So, having not had those compass points when I was young, and having the opportunity to potentially give them to my children, I encourage anybody listening to this who has kids to seriously consider having your kids go through this testing service.
Well, not only is that a great endorsement, but I agree with you 100%. I'm a father too, and of course, I have two daughters, and they grew up hearing about aptitude testing their whole lives. So when my daughter was 12, my older daughter, she insisted on coming in for testing. And I said, well, that's a little too young. We don't have any norms until age 14. She says, oh, but I'm smart and I'm motivated and I want to do it, And I said, well, we can't. She says, okay, I'll make you a deal. If you promise to test me on my 14th birthday, I'll stop bugging you. So we did. We came in here the day after her 14th birthday. Now, that's not necessarily the right age for everybody. For some students, it might even be better to wait till junior year in high school when they're starting to contemplate colleges and majors and so forth. But for the interested, motivated student who's mature and interested, 14 is not a bad age.
Right. Well, parents that are listening, take note here. Of course, the flip side as well is I think the three people that would benefit most from this, and again, I want to repeat, I think that almost anybody, should consider doing this just as a life enhancer. But it's the person that really wants to make a big change. We talked about them. It's younger people who are, about to explode onto the world. And then I think it's people that are approaching retirement and really trying to figure out what do they want to do with the next act of their life. Do you get a lot of retirees coming in? Or soon to be
Not
retirees?
A lot, but we do get some. Because a lot of people are under the impression that, it's too late for me, But we do get a number of retired. Just, in the last couple of months, I've tested people in their 60s who are contemplating retirement.
Yeah, I would think for that type of person, this would be a great test to consider.
Absolutely.
You literally have the chance to completely, wipe the slate clean and do something very different with your time. And why not make sure that it's really custom tailored to, what you value.
Right. I think one other thing that is worth noting, we just recently, one of our researchers did an interesting study of students, and the most notable result was that about 60% of students who had tested with Johnson O'Connor continued their declared major while they were at college. The comparison group in the study who had not tested with JOC changed their major 50% of the time. That changing majors can be a huge undertaking in terms of expense and time and things like that. So just for parents thinking, well, we do charge for our service. We're a not-for-profit organization, but the fee for testing is $750 in New York and $675 in the other labs. But how does that translate into an investment? Well, one college course is much more than that.
Right.
So for a person who does 2 years of engineering and realizes it was a huge mistake and then switches over into the liberal arts school, that's, a big undertaking.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned two things there. Just to clarify what you said, you're saying that kids who took the Johnson O'Connor test before they went to college changed their majors much less frequently. Correct? Right. So they were much more likely to pick a course and stick with it, and hopefully that's because the course was much more aligned with their innate aptitudes and interests.
Yeah, often people will, after they leave here, will realize, hey, you know what, this is a good major for me because now I have some objective criteria to base it on.
Right. And then secondly, you mentioned the price of the exam. It is a more pricey test than, say, the Myers-Briggs or a lot of the sort of, personality / strength finder tests out there.
That's
And,
correct.
and I will, again, continue to give my endorsement here, which is I think when you amortize the value of the results versus that cost, across the rest of your life, I think it's an absolutely screaming deal. It's a complete slam dunk
Well, thank
investment.
you for the endorsement. And you, just in terms of the statistics, if you're changing even a major, or taking one additional class, it pays for itself.
Right, it's already paid itself right back.
Exactly.
And it's the kind of thing that there's only so much you can get, I think, by taking those tests where you're filling in the bubbles. What I really like about Johnson O'Connor's methodology is it's very active, as you mentioned. I mean, they're like games, but I mean, you are literally, if it's a spatial test, you are assembling, blocks together. If it's a dexterity test, a manual dexterity test, you are, doing that in real time. And by the way, I got to stop for 1 second and say, I was pretty convinced I moved those pins faster with my tweezers than any person alive, and I scored below the median, and I couldn't believe it.
Yes. Lots of people feel the same way. I myself felt that way. I said, hey, I got all these pins in. I think I probably scored pretty high in this. I was in like the 10th percentile.
I was shocked. Yeah, God.
Yeah. So the thing is, sometimes you don't have an accurate self-perception. You may think, hey, I'm doing this pretty well, but what comes out is, how did you compare to everyone else in your age group who did the exact same thing?
Right.
The same circumstance. That's what it puts into perspective.
Well, and when I talked about blind spots earlier, that's exactly right. They're just, they are blind spot's a blind spot because we are blind to it. We just don't see it. And, that was a great example where I didn't think I was maybe the world's best pin mover, but I would have bet on myself in a race versus the average person, and clearly I would have lost. So,
see, we saved you a lot of money there.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And the wager you would have made.
Exactly. So, we've talked about the methodology. We've talked about sort of how the test runs. We've talked about who should take it. Is there anything else you'd like to say in terms of, once somebody's got the results and they then go back out into the world, whether it's in their own careers or their own lives, how are people really using this information? What's the application you most commonly see?
Well, many people, as I said, will make fine-tune adjustments to their career paths. The question I ask after the end of the discussion session, where we go over the results, is, "Are you surprised?" And most people say, no, I'm not surprised by any of this, but they wouldn't have necessarily been able to put it into words. So it gives them, labels to attach. It gives them more concrete evidence that they are actually hardwired and talented at certain things. And it helps them go out and make changes with confidence. I think you're a great example of somebody who, this emboldened you to make a huge career change. So some people use it that way. Other people are not in a position where they're able to make those changes or don't feel they are, and sometimes they, again, find satisfying hobbies or avocations. And then sometimes people go full speed ahead and end up really excelling on the path that they've been on with with renewed vigor and confidence. So it can be empowering for many people.
Great. Well, for someone who's listening who is hearing you describe those benefits and thinking, boy, this sounds like something I'd really love to do, or at least learn more about, where should they go?
Well, they can start off with our website. We have a newly designed website. It's www.jocrf.org. And they can also feel free to contact me in the New York office. My telephone number is 212-269-0550.
Oh, you're very kind and brave to share your phone number there. But I appreciate you doing it. And there are Johnson O'Connor offices in a lot of major cities in the U.S.,
That's
correct?
Correct. Yes, we have one in Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Houston, Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, and Washington, D.C.
Great. So for the vast majority of people, there's a center within a day's drive, more or less.
Yes, yes.
Great. And do you have any internationally as well?
We do not. We are only in the continental U.S.
All right. Are there any plans at any point? We have probably 25%
No, at one
of our
point we
listeners
had a
international.
charter for a center in Toronto, and we had one in Mexico, but those have run out, and we have no plans to expand beyond U.S. borders at this point. We're looking to expand internally first.
Okay.
And maybe in the future.
Well, for our international listeners,
we do get lots of requests.
I bet you do.
From other countries. Oh, can you please, open up a center in Australia and Singapore, and. But at this point, we do have no plans. So unfortunately, people outside the U.S. will have to travel to one of our locations. And again, these are not tests that can be done remotely. They're individually administered.
Right. All right. So for our international listeners, sorry for the bad news, but if you come over here to the States, this might be a fun thing to bake into a trip out here.
A lot of people do that. They combine this with, a trip to New York to go and see Broadway plays and, the sights of New York.
Yeah, frankly, I think it's a great way to, make sure you come home from a trip having had some fun, but also taking real value home from you that's going to last a lifetime, really. All right. Well, in closing, Steve, first I want to say thanks so much for really breaking all this down for us. And
Sure.
I really do hope that anybody listening to this who has been wrestling with, life decisions where these types of insights may be useful, definitely go check out the website that Steve mentioned and, pick up the phone and talk to a researcher at a center that's near you if you think you might want to learn more and talk about potentially scheduling a session there. In closing, I'll just say, when I talk about why take the test with people, Steve,
Yes.
what I say at the end of the day is what the test results help people find is purpose. And there are other components to finding purpose in life, but really understanding what are the things that intrinsically motivate you and that you are just wired for is a huge component of that. And as I said, there are other tests out there that can contribute to an understanding of that. But if you could only do one, I would say do this test. Does that resonate with you as well, the whole purpose angle?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for such a great endorsement. But people do hopefully leave our office with a sense of, what kind of work will be most meaningful and fulfilling based on how I'm hardwired and my natural talents. We also can direct people just on basic things like what is the work approach that best suits you? Are you, really wired for teamwork, or are you more individual and specialized in your scope? I think that you gave a very accurate description of what people can expect.
Well, thanks, and I appreciate you thanking me for my endorsement, but really I guess I should be thanking Johnson O'Connor, the man himself, where he's still alive. Again, it made such a big difference in my life, and if anybody's curious who's listening, we don't have any sort of business relationship with Johnson O'Connor. This is just really coming from me personally with the value I found in my experience there, but with that, Steve, I'm going to thank you again for giving us so much of your time, and we'll post the links to the website and some of the resources you mentioned along here with the podcast. But if anybody has questions on the test itself further, please ask them in the comments section, and we'll make sure they get answered for you. And with that, Steve, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
All right, talk soon.
Okay, take care.